Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The Mask of Constant Goodness. Have you ever felt the quiet exhaustion that comes from always trying to be good? From waking each morning determined to please, to say the right thing, to never offend, to hide the storm that brews beneath your polite smile? It's a strange kind of fatigue, not of the body, but of the soul. You tell yourself that virtue is peace, that self-control is strength, but somewhere deep down, you feel the tension of 1,000 swallowed words. You have built a perfect facade, but perfection, as Arthur Schopenhauer once warned, is a beautiful form of self-torture. You spend your life editing yourself, trimming every edge, softening every truth, to remain acceptable. When anger rises, you bury it. When envy whispers, you silence it. When desire awakens, you chain it quickly before anyone sees. You think this makes you noble, but what if this endless correction is what's breaking you? Schopenhauer called it the split of the self, the one who feels, and the one who pretends. The first is raw, chaotic, and real. The second is immaculate, rehearsed, endlessly performing for the world's applause. Between them stretches a gulf of quiet suffering. Every act of forced virtue widens that gulf. You smile when you want to cry. You forgive before you've even processed the wound. You say yes while every cell inside you screams no. People praise your patience, your kindness, your humility, and yet they have no idea how heavy those words feel. They do not see the private cost of your calm. You have become an expert at appearing untroubled while slowly dissolving inside. This is the tragedy of moral perfectionism. The more you strive to be good, the further you drift from what is genuine. You mistake approval for love, discipline for dignity, control for peace. But control is not peace, it is simply fear disguised as virtue, fear of rejection, fear of being disliked, fear of showing the darker impulses that make you human. From childhood, you were told to be good, a good student, a good friend, a good citizen. You learned early that goodness is rewarded and rebellion punished. And so you began polishing yourself like a mirror, trying to reflect only what others wanted to see. Yet mirrors do not live, they only show images. The cost of always being agreeable is that you stop being alive in your own skin. Schopenhauer saw through the illusion. He believed that beneath every polished act of morality lives something deeper and far less polite, the will, a blind, relentless energy that drives every creature to pursue what it desires. The lion hunts, the tree reaches for sunlight, the human seeks validation, pleasure, survival. This will, he said, does not care for good or evil, it simply wants. And when we deny it in the name of constant virtue, we do not purify ourselves, we fracture. The will suppressed becomes resentment, the desire denied becomes poison. You think you are conquering your darker nature, but you are only forcing it underground, where it festers unseen. That is why so many gentle souls carry quiet bitterness. Their smiles hide fatigue, their kindness hides fear, their patience hides the wish to finally be allowed to stop pretending. The truth is that constant goodness often isn't goodness at all. It's negotiation, a way of controlling how others see you. You are kind to avoid rejection. You are generous to remain indispensable. You are humble to protect yourself from envy or judgment. You perform goodness to keep chaos at bay, but the performance becomes its own prison. The more you repress, the more you ache for authenticity. Imagine, just for a moment, dropping the mask. Imagine admitting to yourself, I am not always kind. I am not always patient. I have desires that scare me. Would the world truly end, or would you finally begin to live honestly? Schopenhauer's insight is not an invitation to cruelty, but to honesty. He reminds us that pretending to be flawless does not make us virtuous, it only makes us divided. To accept our imperfection is to take the first step toward peace. To acknowledge our selfish will is to free it from hypocrisy. True goodness, he argued, does not arise from suppression but from understanding, from knowing that the same will that moves within you also moves within others. When you see that, judgment fades, and compassion begins. So if you feel weary of being good all the time, perhaps it's because you've mistaken self-erasure for virtue. The real task is not to please everyone, but to reconcile the two halves of yourself, the one who feels and the one who pretends, until they can finally speak the same truth. Only then can kindness flow naturally, not as performance, but as freedom. The invisible prison. From the moment you were a child, the rules of goodness surrounded you like invisible air. Be kind. Be polite. Be understanding. Don't talk back. Don't be angry. The world clapped for obedience and called it virtue. Slowly, you learned that approval was love and that to be accepted, you must always be pleasant. Somewhere between the gold stars of childhood and the quiet exhaustion of adulthood, the mask fused with your skin. You became what others needed, not because you wanted to, but because you were afraid not to. This is how the invisible prison begins, not with walls of stone, but with habits of self-denial. Every time you said yes while your heart whispered no, another bar formed. Every time you swallowed anger, ignored your pain, or hid your disappointment, the cell tightened. And the cruelest part? Society admires your prison. It calls you a good person. But goodness without authenticity is servitude. Schopenhauer saw this long before modern psychology gave it names like people-pleasing or toxic empathy. He described it as the slow suicide of the self. When you live entirely for others' approval, your identity begins to blur. You don't know what you truly want, you only know what will keep the peace. You wear gentleness like armor, humility like chains. At first, it feels noble to be the one who endures, who forgives, who never complains. You tell yourself that selflessness is strength. Yet deep down, you know it's fear, fear of conflict, fear of losing affection, fear of being called selfish. So you keep giving, even when your soul is empty. You offer help when you need it most. You smile when you're crumbling. You listen to everyone else's pain but have no space left for your own. The myth of moral perfection breeds a cruel dependency. Your worth begins to depend on external validation. A compliment feels like oxygen. A criticism feels like suffocation. You live on an emotional seesaw, elevated when praised, shattered when ignored. And in that fragile state, you mistake survival for virtue. You start confusing exhaustion with goodness, silence with maturity, and submission with love. But Schopenhauer warned that beneath this illusion of goodness lies the will, the primal, restless drive within all beings. It doesn't vanish when ignored, it hides and transforms. When you repress your natural impulses for too long, the will rebels. It returns disguised as guilt, resentment, or sudden anger that seems to appear from nowhere. You tell yourself you're being irrational, but it's not madness, it's your buried self trying to breathe. Think of the countless moments you've tolerated what felt unbearable just to preserve your image of being good. You endure criticism from friends, extra work from colleagues, indifference from loved ones, all to avoid the guilt of saying no. But every unspoken truth leaves a trace, a bitterness that settles in your chest. That quiet bitterness, Schopenhauer would say, is the shadow of your denied will. The invisible prison of goodness also feeds on social approval. The world loves the self-sacrificing figure, the mother who gives everything, the worker who never complains, the friend who always listens. These figures are admired, until they break. Then people whisper, "I never thought they were capable of that anger." But anger doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's the echo of years of silence. It's the will demanding acknowledgement after being buried alive. To live like this is to divide yourself into two beings, one who obeys, one who resents. The obedient one smiles, nods, agrees, and earns applause. The resentful one hides in the dark, feeding on what's left of your authenticity. The more you suppress it, the more it festers. And when it finally surfaces, it does so violently, in words you regret, in sudden coldness, in the quiet decision to withdraw from the world entirely. Schopenhauer's truth is brutal but liberating. Goodness that demands your erasure is not goodness at all. It's a mask the will wears to control others' perception of you. It is manipulation disguised as virtue, fear disguised as humility. If you've ever felt trapped between wanting to speak and fearing to lose someone's love, you have tasted this prison. And yet, knowing this is the first crack in its walls. To see your conditioning is to begin reclaiming your will. Real morality does not ask you to disappear, it asks you to become conscious. It asks you to say yes with truth and no with dignity. You do not owe the world perfection. You owe yourself honesty. The moment you stop performing goodness and start living truthfully, something miraculous happens, your kindness becomes real. It flows not from fear, but from freedom. And that, Schopenhauer would say, is where humanity begins, not in the mask of virtue, but in the courage to take it off. The will beneath the halo. For most of your life, you were taught that being good meant resisting what was dark within you, your anger, your envy, your desire. You were told to master yourself, to tame your impulses, to fight the chaos of your emotions. But what if that battle was never meant to be won? What if, as Schopenhauer believed, this war between the good self and the wild self is the very root of human suffering? Schopenhauer called this inner force the will. Not willpower, as we commonly understand it, but something far older, deeper, and more primitive, the raw pulse of life that drives all existence. The will makes the flower turn towards sunlight and the wolf hunt under a cold moon. It's what pushes the child to cry, the artist to create, the lover to reach for another's hand. It is blind, relentless, and indifferent to morality. It wants what it wants, endlessly. He believed that this will is the true essence of who we are, hidden beneath our polite social selves. Every act of kindness, every burst of rage, every spark of ambition originates from it. You may think your decisions are rational or moral, but beneath each one, the will whispers its own agenda. You can silence it for a while with discipline, religion, or social duty, but it will always return. Here lies the tragedy of those who live to appear flawless. By suppressing their will in the name of purity, they don't become saintly, they become fractured. Imagine a river forced underground. It doesn't disappear, it carves unseen tunnels through the rock until one day it bursts through with violent force. So it is with the will. The more you repress it, the more destructive it becomes when it resurfaces. You've seen it, haven't you? The person who is endlessly patient until they suddenly explode. The gentle friend who one day cuts everyone off. The calm spouse who, after years of quiet endurance, leaves without a word. These eruptions are not random. They are the voice of the repressed will, demanding to be acknowledged. Schopenhauer's view was uncompromising. Morality that denies desire is not virtue, it's hypocrisy. You cannot build goodness by pretending not to feel. You can only build resentment, self-loathing, and exhaustion. Yet our culture rewards this hypocrisy. We admire those who seem unshakably composed, who never show anger, who sacrifice endlessly. We call them enlightened. But enlightenment that demands blindness to one's own nature is only a polite form of self-destruction. The will is not evil. It simply is. It wants to live, to express, to seek pleasure, power, love, safety, whatever survival demands. The danger begins when we deny this truth and replace it with masks. When we claim we have no selfish motives, no pride, no lust, no ambition, we become dishonest, not to others, but to ourselves. And dishonesty always exacts a price. How many times have you done something good only to secretly crave recognition? How many times have you helped someone, hoping they would finally see your worth? How many times have you smiled not out of joy but out of fear that frowning would make you seem ungrateful? This is the will dressed in saintly clothing, the ego pretending to be selfless. Schopenhauer did not ask us to abandon virtue, he asked us to see through it. To look behind the mask of moral perfection and recognize the pulsing, messy humanity beneath. Because only by confronting this can we begin to live consciously. When you see your selfish impulses clearly, they lose their power to deceive you. You may still feel envy, anger, or greed, but now you know their source. You are no longer their puppet. The real danger is not in feeling desire, it's in denying that you do. The repressed will find ways to express itself, through manipulation, passive aggression, guilt, or even physical illness. You think you are being virtuous by swallowing your pain, but in truth, you are feeding it. What is unacknowledged grows stronger in the dark. To face the will honestly is terrifying because it destroys the illusion of control. It reveals that we are not purely rational beings guided by reason, but emotional creatures moved by ancient instincts. Yet this realization, far from degrading us, can be liberating. When you stop pretending to be angelic, you begin to understand everyone else's flaws too. Compassion is born not from superiority, but from shared imperfection. So, ask yourself, what have you buried under your goodness? What desires have you silenced in the name of virtue? What truth have you denied because you were afraid it might make you less lovable? That is where your will hides, waiting. And it will keep waiting until you finally look it in the eye and say, I see you. Schopenhauer's message is not to destroy the will, but to make peace with it. To let go of the exhausting performance of moral perfection and instead act with awareness. To know when your kindness is genuine and when it is simply fear in disguise. For only when you understand the will that drives you can you begin to live not as an actor in someone else's play, but as the author of your own. The trap of self-sacrifice and moral manipulation. You have probably been praised for it your entire life, your patience, your willingness to give, your ability to put others before yourself. You have such a big heart, they say, and you smile, because that praise feels like proof that your sacrifices matter. Yet late at night, when everyone else is asleep, there is an ache that no amount of admiration can ease. It is the ache of having given too much. Schopenhauer saw this quiet misery for what it is, a disguised form of servitude. He wrote that what society calls self-sacrifice is often not virtue at all, but the will wearing a halo. It is the same selfish energy, the will to be loved, to be needed, to stay in control of how others see us, now dressed in the robes of martyrdom. You convince yourself you are acting from compassion, but deep down you are negotiating. If I give enough, they won't leave me. If I am endlessly patient, they will value me. The trouble is that this payment rarely arrives. The gratitude you expect seldom comes, and when it doesn't, resentment begins to ferment. You continue to smile, to nod, to serve, but inside a storm gathers. Each unspoken "thank you" becomes a bruise on the soul. Each favor returned with silence feels like a betrayal. Until one day you catch yourself thinking, after all I've done for them, and in that moment, your goodness has turned to poison. This is the hidden arithmetic of false virtue. What began as generosity becomes emotional bookkeeping. You start to measure affection by how much you've endured, how many times you've yielded, how quietly you've suffered. And when the world doesn't balance the ledger, anger takes the place of love. Schopenhauer warned that the will, when denied its honest expression, seeks subtler routes to power. Self-sacrifice becomes one of its clever disguises. By being indispensable to others, you ensure your place in their lives. By bearing their burdens, you control the image of yourself as irreplaceable. The more you give, the more moral authority you gain, or so it seems. But this authority is fragile. The moment people stop needing you, the structure collapses, and you are left face to face with the emptiness you were trying to fill. Worse still, the cult of self-sacrifice makes you easy to exploit. Those who understand guilt can bend you with a single word, please. You rush to fix what is not yours to fix, to carry what is not yours to carry. You begin to vanish, piece by piece, until your existence is defined only by service. And the tragedy is that society rewards this disappearance. It calls you saintly while quietly consuming your strength. Schopenhauer would call this moral slavery. You obey the commands of virtue not because you believe in them, but because disobedience terrifies you. You fear being seen as selfish, ungrateful, or unkind. You have been conditioned to confuse self-respect with arrogance and boundaries with cruelty. And so you keep offering pieces of yourself until there is almost nothing left to give. At that point, something inside you snaps. Sometimes it appears as burnout, the body refusing to continue. Sometimes it emerges as bitterness, sarcasm, or cold detachment. The mask of the good person finally cracks, revealing years of unspoken pain. Those around you are shocked. They say, "I never knew you felt this way." But how could they? You never allowed them to see you bleed. This is why Schopenhauer's insight is so radical. He insists that self-sacrifice without awareness is not virtue, it is manipulation, of others and of oneself. It is a performance built on fear. True compassion, he says, cannot exist where freedom has been traded for approval. Only when an act of kindness asks for nothing in return can it be called moral. To live by that principle, you must reclaim your will, not to dominate, but to exist honestly. You must learn to give when it feels right and to refuse when it does not. You must let go of the fantasy that suffering earns love. Real love does not need you broken to prove your goodness. It asks only for your presence, your sincerity, your truth. So the next time you feel the impulse to overextend, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this out of genuine care, or out of fear of losing affection? That single question can dismantle years of conditioning. Because the moment you recognize that your virtue has been serving your fear, you step out of the invisible theater. You stop acting holy and start living human. And in that raw humanity, imperfect, honest, unadorned, you discover a compassion far purer than self-sacrifice. One that neither enslaves nor manipulates, but simply flows. The kind of compassion that asks for nothing, not even the title of being good. True compassion and the freedom of imperfection. There comes a moment in every life when the performance collapses, when pretending to be endlessly good, endlessly patient, endlessly strong becomes unbearable. It happens quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. You realize that the more you have tried to be perfect, the further you have drifted from peace. Every smile feels rehearsed, every apology automatic, every act of kindness tinged with exhaustion. The truth Schopenhauer left us is both unsettling and liberating. Perfection is not the path to virtue, it is the enemy of it. He wrote that beneath all human morality lies the same restless force, the will, that drives every creature in existence. You can suppress it, disguise it, or dress it in noble language, but you cannot destroy it. And the more you fight it, the more it turns your goodness into guilt, your patience into resentment, your compassion into control. To find real freedom, Schopenhauer said, we must stop waging war against our own nature. We must accept that we are not saints but humans, fragile, contradictory, and unfinished. True compassion begins the moment this illusion of moral purity dies. It is not born from effort or obedience but from recognition. When you finally stop pretending to be flawless, you can see the imperfection of others without judgment. Their anger no longer shocks you because you have felt your own. Their selfishness doesn't disgust you because you know how desire burns within you too. Out of that recognition, that shared fragility, compassion flows naturally, like water finding its course after the dam has broken. This is the compassion Schopenhauer described, not the sentimental pity that appears in slogans and social rituals, but something raw and existential. It arises when you feel, even for an instant, that another's suffering is your own. The distance between me and them dissolves, and for a fleeting moment, life sees itself through your eyes. Pain recognizing pain, he called it, the only true foundation of morality. In that moment, kindness requires no effort. You help not because you should, but because it hurts not to. You forgive not because it's righteous, but because you understand how easy it is to be lost. You no longer act good to be seen as good, you act simply because you can no longer separate yourself from the world that suffers with you. This is the paradox: once you stop striving to be good, genuine goodness appears. Once you stop performing empathy, real empathy awakens. When you no longer need to control how others perceive you, love becomes effortless. It does not demand applause, nor does it fear rejection. It just is. And with this awareness comes something even rarer, peace. Not the fragile calm that comes from obedience, but the quiet strength that grows from self-acceptance. You stop fighting your desires as enemies and start seeing them as messengers. You stop punishing yourself for your flaws and begin to understand that imperfection is not a failure, it is proof of life. Schopenhauer knew that as long as we chase perfection, we remain slaves to the will. Every act of moral performance feeds the ego's hunger to be seen, to be admired, to be superior. But the moment you admit, I, too, am flawed, the chain breaks. You reclaim your humanity. You can love without ownership, give without resentment, forgive without self-erasure. The will still lives within you, but you no longer confuse it with your worth. You no longer hide it under the costume of virtue or use it to manipulate affection. You see it clearly, its hunger, its restlessness, and in seeing it, you gain power over it. That is freedom, not perfection, but awareness. Imagine living without the constant pressure to impress, to justify, to be pure. Imagine allowing yourself to be angry without guilt, to fail without shame, to love imperfectly and still know you are enough. In that space, compassion breathes again. You can finally help others not from duty, but from connection. You can finally say no without fear and yes without calculation. This is the quiet revolution Schopenhauer envisioned, Not a world of saints, but a world of conscious beings who have made peace with their shadows. For when you embrace the darkness within, it loses its power to control you. And when you stop chasing the illusion of goodness, what remains is something far more beautiful, the simple, unpretending humanity that links all of us. So let the mask fall. Let imperfection be your teacher. You do not need to be flawless to be kind, you only need to be real. True compassion is not found in the denial of the self, but in the acceptance of it, the courage to say, I, too, am broken, and therefore, I understand. And perhaps that is the purest form of goodness the human heart will ever know.